Today, I'm very excited to welcome Patricia Lockwood, celebrating the release of her new book, Will There Ever Be Another You? Patricia Lockwood is the best-selling author of the Booker Prize finalist and Dylan Thomas Prize-winning novel, No One Is Talking About This, named one of the 10 best books of 2021 by the New York Times Book Review, and one of the Atlantic's great American novels of the past 100 years. Her other books include the memoir Priestdaddy, named one of the 10 best books of 2017 by the New York Times Book Review, as well as two poetry collections. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the New Republic, and the London Review of Books, where she is a contributing editor. Lockwood will be in conversation with Emma Sarappo, Senior Associate Editor for The Atlantic, where she covers books and literary culture. Previously, she was the arts editor at the Washington City Paper. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Patricia Lockwood and Emma Sarappo.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, everybody. This is so exciting. I'm so excited to be here with Patricia Lockwood. I'm a huge fan. I imagine some of you in the crowd are as well. So this is just a really fantastic opportunity.
Totally unknown side.
Yeah, the second wing is like a new addition.
Yeah, there's another wing. Hello.
So I think we're going to start with a reading from the book. Patricia, do you want to go ahead and do that?
Yes. So I typically read just the first little bit of The Changeling to kind of put you in the mind of this very mental narrator. But Emma has requested the Catherine Ann Porter section, which is also a favorite of mine. So I will read that instead. So she's crazy. That's all you have to know. Any pre-existing anxiety? The doctor asked. No, she said very quietly, though in fact she was the kind of child who was scared not only of the fireworks, but of the half hour it took to find parking before the fireworks. Any other symptoms? Her voice rolled up over her tongue and stopped at her bottom teeth. How to tell him I cannot do my work? He would look at her in her Looney Tunes shirt and her cutoffs that she wore because one day she had tried a sort of wrap dress and then looked down at the crosswalk and He Vaguna was out. That's how she found it written down later. He Vaguna. And say exactly what is your work? And she would sit up straight as if on her deathbed and recite in the voice of authority that still lives somewhere inside her, what makes Pale Horse, Pale Rider real? What makes it serious is its counterpoint. If Miranda had simply spoken of herself, the pains in her chest and her head and her heart, it's not even a matter of believing. No one would have cared. If she had said, oh, I cannot write my pieces. My hair has decided to grow in the other direction. I have lost that fine, easy seat on my self-astride. What can that matter to us? A woman's death is not much bigger than her nightly headache, and no one wants to know about those. It is the fact that she is in love, with the war playing out behind her, and the fact that her young man will die. This is what allows us to love her, a woman like that, with everything in her lap and her choice of horses. She could explain that they were always weighing writers to see whether they were good. Not good at writing. Hilton would write about Catherine Ann Porter, she would explain, as if Hilton were famous to him, as if Hilton had preceded him too. And he would end with the huge emerald Catherine Ann bought for herself when she was truly rich. And the emerald would begin to glow like a gas, backward over everything she had ever done. And all of them did it. They walked into the writer like she was a knight, and lay shivering on the ledge there until they were lifted up by the hand of their own discernment, which was sometimes just the fact that they were alive and she was not. But there was a real emerald, and it was what had really happened. That night she was visited by all she had ever read or had been told or felt or thought about jungles. The fact that she had almost died, which she said had separated her from other people for a very long time. But there was still the portrait of Catherine Ann with her hair shocked white. Oh, If only she could describe what had happened to her instead of what was happening to herself. With someone else, I can believe everything and spend 10 pages on the twitch of an eyebrow. I can lie on the ledge and be visited by everything I have ever read or been told or felt or thought until my own hand plucks me up into the night and the fireworks. She swung her leg's side saddle in case he Vaguna was out. That is my work, she cried to the doctor. Relaxed. You can really like get back in these chairs.
Yeah, they're
it's
really quite nice.
Relaxed.
So sorry to brag.
One of these, yeah.
Have any of you seen the portrait of Catherine Ann Porter with her hair shot white? It's really quite striking.
It turned white after she had influenza. Yeah, she almost died and she got white hair. Nothing like that happened to me. It was very beautiful. It looked super cool. I did not get that. Very jealous of Catherine Ann.
Very interesting use of the first person there because, you know, this is a novel, right? But your main character is both recognizably the protagonist of your last novel. No one is talking about this. And also recognizable as sharing many of the biographical details of one Patricia Lockwood. Yeah. But at points, you know, we've just read an excerpt in the third person. At points, the narrative shifts to the first person. Who is the protagonist of your novel? You know, is she you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wasn't me when I wrote it, so it could never be true that it was me. It was sort of like I was standing 6 inches to the side of myself. I felt that my name might be Dennis. I was like, what's going on with me here? So I had this question earlier, actually, and I was talking a little about it. I was like, he was like, so, you know, you have Priestdaddy, and that's a memoir. And you have No One Is Talking About This, and that's sort of like biographical fiction, you know, that type of thing. And then you have this. Is this the same protagonist? Yeah. And it does, I think, begin that way. I think in Fairy Pools, she goes to Scotland, and there is continuity between that protagonist and this one, and then something changes, and she is stolen from herself. And so, yeah, and then it's called The Changeling, but you can't call your book The Changeling because a couple other people have done that. There's actually several others have done that, yeah.
So, yeah, this changeling idea, I mean, it's so interesting to me because your writing and your voice is so unique, and yet a major theme of this book is being cloned or swapped or replaced or losing your fundamental self. The title of the book comes from a line about Dolly the sheep, famously cloned. Yeah. And what's that about? You know, you're so unique. Who could be? What would happen if you were 6 inches to the left of yourself?
Right. So that is kind of a question. Like, I am sort of an eccentric, and you really do. It's brought home to you that something's really wrong when you're like, okay, yeah, I'm not me. I see gorillas in the trees. I don't understand what's going on Xena Warrior Princess. Someone asked me, they were like, when did you first know? And I was like, I couldn't understand the plots on Xena Warrior Princess. I was like, something is terribly, terribly wrong with me. So it was kind of then. But yeah, I was like, what is this? What is actually happening? And there is the matter of my name, which I've never really felt like a Patricia. I've been called Pat and Patty in my youth. I've been called Trish. Sometimes I get Trish the Dish. It never felt like a very close name to me. And I think when I was ill, it felt honestly like I had picked it up like a softball and just thrown it into a far field. So yeah, there's you can't exactly duplicate or explain if someone has not experienced that, like they might not be able to follow you there, but you wake up and it's like gorillas, Xena, I'm not me. Yeah.
Yeah. You're reflecting, so something happens to this narrator very, very recognizably early in the novel. And you had COVID, right?
Yeah.
In early 2020.
I got it from John Harvard, yeah. Yeah.
Just one more thing he's done.
I know.
But, you're reflecting on in this book on COVID and COVID trauma, but what I get from the writing is less reflection on masks and tests and hospitals, sort of the things that are well remembered or indelible in the mind, and more the overarching weirdness of having society's rules or the rules of personal interaction change overnight.
Yeah.
And there's also sort of a passage in here when you talk about or the narrator is thinking about what to talk about it or not to talk about it. When you decided to write about it, what what parts of the experience did you want to capture or convey?
Yeah, that's really perceptive. I did something very tricky, I felt, which is that I didn't even really use the word COVID, right? So we're taken into this physical state, but we don't know exactly what's caused it. And it will be recognizable to people who lived through it. But I was really interested in sort of the way we fell apart when we couldn't talk to each other, when we couldn't see each other. There's sort of a little bit that I really like where she goes to the neurologist and he asks her to take her shoes off and she's not wearing socks, and he sort of like holds her foot in his hand. And she was like, I wasn't wearing socks, which had introduced bareness into the situation. And the first thing that comes to her mind is like, am I going to have sex with him? Like, because we weren't touching people. We were not having just these ordinary interactions. Someone like touches your foot and you're like, well, we're married now, I guess. Like the rules are completely different. And then there's also a little scene in The Artist is Present where if you traveled like in 2021 or something like that, I had to go over for the Women's Prize ceremony. I had to go over for the Booker Prize ceremony. That was incredibly surreal, very, very strange. And you had to get like a negative test within 72 hours or something like that. And it was very chaotic and very nerve-wracking. And I remember on the Women's Prize flight, I was sort of like ushered into a tent outside Heathrow and sort of took my mask down. And this handsome young man swabs me, which is this very intimate thing to do. They really stick it up there. I think we all remember. They get in there and all around. And there was a moment afterwards where he takes it out and he just sits staring at me and gave me like no indication that I was supposed to put my mask back on. It was just like we were just like looking at each other in this tent, and he was never going to tell me to do it. We were just like drinking in each other's faces. It was totally bizarre.
They really stick it up in there. I mean,
they get it so far. And we were like, are we touching our brains? Is this part of the issue? Well, like, are we stirring them or just getting in it?
How do I do it correctly? But I mean, at the beginning, there was just this lack of sort of knowledge.
Yes, it was totally like a Wild West. Yeah.
I had surgery in early 2020 and I had to get a drive-through test. And all I knew at that time was they stick it up there.
They stick it up there. I was actually
quite terrified.
Can't you feel like the little stinging up there right in your tear duct? Yep, you know. It's like a physical thing.
I wouldn't be there for that. That's not my business. Right. But the nose, I was quite worried about.
Yeah, that's my nose. Okay.
But this sort of theme of like miscommunication is a major part of this book. The writing is at times confusing, but you are also intentionally portraying a mind that is confused. There's at one point she describes herself as feeling pulled out of the world by the hair. Yeah. And it's not just a metaphor. It's very deliberate. And the nurse she's talking to doesn't understand what she means. And I guess what I'm curious about is in your writing writ large, not just this book, do you find that readers generally do catch your unique idiom? Yeah. In your last novel, no one is talking about this. There's a certain subset of online people, right, who might recognize "Don't email my wife" or the grizzly British witch pits. Like
that's a deep one. Almost no one recognizes
the grizzly British witch
pits anymore.
But this one is more personal. So I wonder, like, how you trust readers to sort of speak your language.
Yeah, they always follow me. I mean, I've had good fortune in that, and it's also because I started out as a poet, but I've always found that people read up. And like in Priestdaddy, there's kind of a weird chapter called Voice, which is a little bit of a lyric essay, and it's everyone's favorite chapter. Like it's the thing that the publishing house might worry about, that you yourself might worry about if you're tuned in that direction. I'm not very tuned in that direction. The things that are accessible, that they want to be accessible, like it doesn't have to. People read up. They read up, and they like mystery. I know that I wrote the book when I was crazy, and I edited it when I was sane. But looking at it, I know, looking at it when I was sane, I was like, this is like so mysterious and cool. Like, what happened? And I also felt like it was really brave. Like, why was she trying to do this? Right? Why was she trying to document this? Like, what was like the persistence, right, that caused her to be there in the center of this physical state, trying to write stuff down?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, what came easiest in the writing of this book, if easy can be sort of quantified? Like, what was the hardest? How did did you stitch it all together?
Yeah, it became easier once we were back in the world. And there's almost a moment. So the narrator is talking to a character named Susanna. And in real life, that is Susanna Clark. And we were having this conversation in real life in like Fitzroy Pub. And I felt time started to travel forward. The second that I was in the world with people, time was moving forward again. Then it was like the narrative resumed and I could start to write things down. Also, if you're in the world with people, people say great things and you write them down and you use these anecdotes in your work. If you're in some sort of, vacuum sealed area where you're not hearing anyone else's thoughts, then you have sort of the first half of the book where it's very much consumed with these rhythms and repetitions and just like hearing yourself, multiplying yourself. So that section, like the changeling, was the most difficult, definitely. But once other people were there, and certainly once I started writing about, events like my husband's almost blowing up in an airplane, then it's like you're writing down what's going on.
Right. Talk a little bit more about that. In this is a book very concerned with the mundanity of day-to-day illness and physical experience, but it's kind of light, as you said, on details about specific illnesses or specific bodily issues or traumas. Yeah. And so I wonder, like, how did you choose what to put in and what to leave out?
Yeah, it's funny because I always really like books where it's like, I'm going to tell you what my temperature is every morning, and I'm going to have this gruel, and I'm going to describe the gruel, and I couldn't do it for myself. I know, I'm like, give me the gruel. Like, I really love that. And I absolutely couldn't do it for myself. I was like, I just want to put in the perceptions because I knew that those could all be true. I was like, what is going to be true in the book is the perceptions. And those to me were the really interesting things. I was like, why does this happen? It was... If you look back at like the mystics, there's this continuity of like what people see in visions, what they hear in visions, what they experience in like hilltop revelations. And I felt that continuity in my illness. I was like, that I can write about. I'm too embarrassed to write about the toast or like the nightgowns or whatever, but I can do this part of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I'm curious, you are a poet, you have also been a memoirist, you are also a novelist. Do you think of yourself primarily as a poet or one over the rest?
It might be the case. Yeah, I have had a couple people reading this book being like, this is like poetry, right? This is like trying to be poetry, really. And I think that might be the case. But it's also true that if you start out writing poetry, that people just think that everything you write is poetry. And anything you read, they're like, I love that poem that was about you going to Rome to meet the Pope. And I was like, yes, that was a great poem that I wrote about going to Rome to meet the Pope. So there's almost this like, it's something really touching about it, that it's like an identity or something, that if you're a poet, what you produce is poetry. It might be why I don't care as much about the genre questions, because everyone is always freaking out about those. And they're like, is it a novel? Is it a memoir? And they're like, their heads are bursting. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. I'm a poet. Like, it's not my business.
Hey, man, I'm a poet.
Hey, man.
I think you have a very specific poetic voice, and it's very concerned with both precise language and also sort of unexpected metaphors.
Yeah.
Like the word scromating appears many times in this book.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, that's probably something that the mystics could have experienced. There's a continuity.
Yeah, scromating unto the Lord. Yeah. I was like, listen, the little flower would have scromated and she would have scromated unto the Lord.
Yeah. And so I guess I wonder, your language, again, it's very much your own, but what are the major influences on your voice?
Yeah, so I think it is musical. I think if you read me closely, I work in a lot of thirds. So it's both biblical, I think, and liturgical, but also there's just some early innate music that is a little bit harder to pin down. But I think it would have to be traced back to like religion. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That is also interesting. I mean, this book has a lot of sort of, I guess, pagan or magical elements.
Mm-hmm.
Changelings obviously appear. You go to Scotland and you're sort of interested in like the fairy pools that you see there. There seems to be these natural or magical laws of exchange.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering a little bit how religion shows, and you see priests in the airport. And
I constantly see priests in the airport, and that's how I know that I'm living a normal life.
Right.
When I'm not seeing those priests, something is wrong.
Right. So I guess, how does religion show up, or how did it show up in this sort of strange, untethered moment?
Yeah, so there's kind of a chapter in the middle that is a little bit more autobiographical too, called Schützenfest. Which is a real festival that Ohioans celebrate. And I still don't entirely know. It's something to do with a hunter shoots an eagle that has stolen a child. I cannot believe that I remember this. And they all celebrate the shooter of the eagle that has carried off the child. I assume the child was caught safely by someone. But yeah, so all of these old men go around with like rifles and they shoot this wooden eagle. And the one that like kills it the most is the Schützen, which is the shooter. It's like this terrible, terrible thing. So anyway, the narrator, shows up at Schützenfest. She's like, why are they taking me to this thing called Schützenfest? What the hell is that? And there's a priest there. And he happens to be her father walking to her across the lawn in like a fishing shirt for some reason, right? So that was something I felt that had to happen too. It wasn't just that you had to be restored to strangers, to new people, to the world, to experience. You had to go back home as well. And you had to encounter your messed up parents, right? Who maybe like believed that COVID wasn't real or were like encouraging other people not to get vaccines and that type of thing. And you had to have that moment as well. And I think that there is something right at the beginning of that chapter that's like the world could not resume until she had seen her priest in the airport, and that's her dad. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's also a sort of conversion narrative here, right, where an experience transforms you, soul inside of you, even if your outside sort of look the same. Also much of this book actually relates to the experience of being interviewed after releasing a book. Yeah. It's depicted generously, I would say, as unpleasant. So I guess, I'm here doing that.
It's very unpleasant.
What do you wish the interviewers would ask you about?
No, it was nothing to do with that. I always liked being interviewed previously, and I never had these feelings before. But going on a book tour in the year 2021 was incredibly different. Does anyone remember like the Zoom reading era where it's like if you were the reader, your body was trying to find an audience that it was never going to reach, right? There was like something in you was reaching out of itself toward people who were not there. And I don't know, I think that being asked questions about myself in that period where I didn't feel like me felt very invasive, right? So there were a couple of like specific interviews that I talked about where it just seemed very invasive, but like it felt invasive to me at that time to be called Patricia. So yeah, it's not something that continues. Like I like interviews and I sort of like to exist in that mode. And I never have like, oh, I wish they would ask me this question. It was just, I was completely insane.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah. Well, I think there are some prospective writers in the crowd. I maybe know some of the people in the crowd. And so I'm wondering, if you can give us kind of a basic 101, like what is your writing routine? What does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, it's very ugly. Some people get very beautiful. Do you get beautiful before you write?
No,
I get super ugly and I put all my hair up like a rooster on top. And I think the uglier I am and like the worse my little pajamas are, like the better it's going to be. I like to it's like jumping out of the pool and not getting dressed or anything, going directly into the writing. You're coming out of a dream and you don't even have time to like put anything on and you just go straight into that state. And then Jason, my saintly husband, brings me a quad espresso from Foxy Loxy and I drink that and I simply go to the moon. And I don't have any breakfast. I know, everyone's like, oh, why are you experiencing all these brain problems? And I'm like, probably my quad espresso that I have every morning on an empty stomach to go to the moon on purpose. Like I am trying to go there. Yeah. And Miette will be on my lap and my feet will be like up like this so that I form like a pussy cradle for her so that she is like perfectly there. And what will happen is that she will slowly encroach more and more like on the page I'm writing on until I have like paw-shaped areas like in my writing where I had to write around her. I do generally read a little something first. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I can't recommend that more highly. It is really, really, really about writing longhand because it's just like that's a few more minutes you're not on your phone, on your computer, like, and there's something about extending the line from here into here that to me really helps, especially in poetry. So I have been doing like poems lately, and it's sort of like you write them from beginning to end in longhand, and it feels totally different. It feels better. It feels a lot better.
Yeah. Well, okay, speaking of your quad espresso.
Yeah, my quad. I just call it my quad. Yeah.
Speaking of your quad, it's, there's mind-altering substances are also heavily referenced in here.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious about like what it's like to write with a mind slightly altered, whether again by a substance or by an illness or by divine providence.
Yeah, when I'm possessed by the Lord. Yeah, no, I totally had a thing where I felt much more altered by the illness than I did by like the very tiny microdose of like mushrooms that I would have in my tea. So my friend Jamie, calling her out, she's like, did I just like confess to a felony in the pages of the New Yorker magazine? I was like, yeah, girl, you did. But she really, really helped me. She just sent me these tiny mushrooms. Oh, do you want to know the story of the mushrooms?
Yeah, please.
They have an interesting provenance. Okay. So, no, it's actually kind of serious. There was a doctor who did heart valve research, and he lost his son suddenly at the age of, I believe, 6 to a problem with the child's heart valves. And he was just absolutely he was in terrible grief. He was not doing well. And one of his friends asked him if he had tried mushrooms. And he said that if he did it, he would grow them himself. Okay. And he grew an acre of mushrooms. And he took them and he gave them to other people. So literally the mushroom that came to me is like a grief and healing mushroom, which felt very powerful and felt like a totally full circle moment and really kind of explained to me why such a small dose had done so much for me. Yeah.
I was floored by an acre of mushrooms.
Listen, I don't know how much an acre is. This is like one of the few sort of like measurements of land. It was a lot of mushroom. But I had a very small amount, and I was like, oh wow, time is traveling normally again. Music sounds like music. Things aren't discordant. I'm not jangled. And of course, what you do then is you read Anna Karenina.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about Tolstoy. I mean, both for the sort of conversion stuff and also just the weird experience of reading Anna Karenina on mushrooms.
Yeah.
Tell us more about how your narrator feels in that moment.
Wow, she is freaking loving it. Thank you for asking. So I don't know why that's the choice, but there was something so perfect about it. It was something I probably started when I was young and couldn't get past the ruble stuff. And I was like, what's going on with this guy Levin? Like, I'm not really interested in that. Yeah. What is going on with Levin? But I had the mushroom tea and I was like, listen, I want to do a couple things. I want to read a stack of Garfield comics as tall as my actual body, and I'm going to read Anna Karenina. And it was amazing. It is such a physical book, and it's so stately in time. Like, Nabokov was obsessed with the time in Anna Karenina for a reason. Of course, he's a pervert, and he's like drawing Kitty's shoes and her skating costume and stuff too. So there's that element as well. But like, there is a reason to pay attention to time in Anna Karenina. Things are heightened in that book. Like, you are experiencing like very intimate lamplit rooms. You're experiencing ballrooms. You're like entering this full body, and you're experiencing like all of her most sort of intimate thoughts, passions. Like, you're inside her as she's climbing the stairs, That's how it felt. And everyone feels that way reading Anna Karenina, whether they've had mushrooms or not. This is my gift to you. I also like the, I won't talk about that. I was going to specifically recommend a translation that was really annoying. But
tell the people.
So I like the Norton critical edition of Anna Karenina. That's a sort of improvement of the Maud translation.
Okay.
It's very nice. Yeah.
That's good to know. Speaking of the time and sort of the forward motion in Anna Karenina, this book frequently circles.
Yeah.
There are eddies. There are moments of severe confusion. But toward the end, the narrator in the first person tells students, a group of assembled students, that the poetic logic generally is narrative. And that feels very apt in this book. Yeah. You come in and out of points of view. You start and end with these catastrophic medical moments. So there's a, sort of an arc, but there's also a kind of like a pulse or a metronome going through.
Nice.
How do you make that show up?
That's really good. I wasn't, totally aware of that, but I do think because it is built on that thing called the refrains, which were these lines that would sort of circle in her head, like lines of poetry, lines of song. They provided, I think, this distinct beat. But honestly, it's probably like a heartbeat rhythm as well. Like, there is something in the background being like, I am alive, I am alive, I am, I am, I am. And there's something that has to keep marching forward, right? Even though time is eddying, even though we're experiencing severe confusion, we are still marching forward, and that provides, I think, that rhythm underneath.
Yeah, the famous Bragg of the Old Heart.
Yeah.
I guess, okay, this is my personal question.
Okay.
We're going to turn it over to the audience.
Yeah.
But you describe bodily indignities in such a fresh and intense and fantastic way. How do you do that so vividly? Scromating, obviously, being pulled out of the world by the hair. I'm sure I have other highlights in here.
You're basically talking about a person that didn't understand she was experiencing headaches. So everything's going to be very fresh indeed when that is true. I'm like, listen, what's this? Being pulled out of the world by the hair? That's interesting. The nurse is like, are you dizzy? And she's like, maybe I'm dizzy, but really I'm being pulled out of the world by the hair. So I described it as just like a garden of perception. Like you are there, you don't know the names for anything. You're the first person in the world to ever have a headache and you don't know what it is and you get to name it. There you go. Yeah.
I think we are right about the time to turn this over to audience questions. There, if you can't see, there is a mic right here by this white pillar. You can line up and come ask a question.
Yes, please.
This very good interview questions.
Excellent interview.
Really.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Oh, yeah, let's clap for me.
Good.
My God.
But
That's who you came here to see.
I don't want to mean to be invasive, Patricia.
No.
Your essays in the LRB are truly electrifying.
Thank
and,
you.
I'm kind of just ripping off the question about your writing process, whether it takes a different tone in terms of referring to a book. And I just wanted to note that the first thing I ever read by you was your essay on John Updike, and that got me. I really, really enjoyed it.
Who's read the Updike essay? Let's get some
And that
cheers
was
in
my
there.
entry point into your world. So, and then, just reading like the essay on, Sylvia Plath's books. So even just reviewing and how it brought out your own joy of creating poetry in the moment, that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm asking the process related to reviewing a book or a text or something, and how does that relate to your process of writing?
Yeah, no, I can be actually really concrete with that. I have the big Moleskine notebooks that are like the pro notebooks, and so there's like a sort of section in the middle that is like the big chunk where you can write, and then there's all this like area on the side where you can add other stuff. So as I am reading physically, cat in the pussy cradle on my lap, I've got this hand over here. I'm reading the book, and anything that strikes me gets written down. It gets physically written down. You're less likely to make mistakes, I think, if that's true, and you're more likely to remember the things you want to quote and think about. And the other thing that it does is if you have this like micro moment of like a little joke or something, write that down too. That's the other thing. My friend Sheila one time, she was like, I haven't written a literary essay in a really long time. Like, how do you do it? Do you do it at the end, or do you take notes as you go? And I was like, I am a big take notes as I go person. And then when you get to the end of it, it's like the whole fossil footprint of your thinking process is there, and you can put it together and you can play with things and move things around. But again, it just goes back to like the longhand thing and being able to kind of collage with your own thoughts after you're done. I had a really cute baby girl tell me the other day, she like came to a party and she's like, I didn't know who you were, so I looked you up and I read that like Updike essay. And then she was like, I read Rabbit Run. And I was like, what did you think? And she was like, well, I hated it. And then she's like, and then I loved it. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole thing. I was like, I'm never writing about someone who is not worthwhile. I'm never doing one of those like takedowns that's like of just some book that's a nothing. Like I'm always caring about the writing. The takeaway is never don't read this person, I was like, read The Witches of Eastwick. It's autumn. You're going to really enjoy it. They all have sex with the devil. It's great.
So I was, when you're talking about this book, you're talking about writing it when you are mad, when you're just fully outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And I know the editing process is different for everyone, but when it comes to writing something like this, when you are so outside of yourself and then you have to return to this other you, how does editing something like that work for you? Did you really have to like cut it down? Did you really feel like you had to make it more sane? What was the sort of process there? Yeah.
So someone again asked me this question earlier. He was like, was there the temptation to go back and make that writing more sane? And I was like, yeah, there would be. But the fact that I was working on those pieces the entire time I was ill, which meant that it was like a 4-year process for some of those pieces that are like 2 pages long, meant that I had gotten them to the point that I wanted them at. Now I did have a choice, right? And I had like about a summer-long period where I was like felt great and was not outside of myself at all and was able to edit the book. And you really had to like trust the previous self that had been mad and like give her that experience and give her what she had written about it and not take that away. There were things that you could do. You could pull stuff out more. You could like deepen characters and like sort of like push through lines through a little bit more. But you couldn't deny her experience of having been mad. Like you couldn't take that away. So I kept a light touch with that. But it's a good question because it's like, yeah, what they're like, oh, sometimes this book is confusing. Yeah, bitch. Okay. It's okay. Like it is okay. And it's a sort of thing where I'm like, it's all right. I have you. I'm going to take you out of this. You can trust me. At the end of the book, we can like exit this, right? It's not a straight line. You know, you don't get well just like that, just like speeding through that process. But I'll take you out of it with me. Like, so you can trust me. You can trust me through this.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is kind of related to the question that was just asked, but in the novel, it feels like there's this tension between, I think you say at one point, the real novelist is a receptacle for the heart. And then later, as it gets to the end of the novel, you say that getting to the end is an oasis you never wanted to reach because the best version is when all the components were in a hurricane. Do you feel that looking back on the novel now, it served more personally as like a receptacle for this time, or was it like a hurricane that's kind of ongoing?
I don't think it's a hurricane. Sally said something very sweet. She read it in draft, and she was like, I was like, this is like the book that no one wants to read, right? I was like, this is like the time that no one wants to read about. This is the thing we were all warned against. And she was like, well, sometimes someone has to come along and put a wreath on the tomb of the time. And I was like, all right. I'll take that, right? Yeah. So it's not like, again, we're not out of it. It's not finished or anything like that. Like we know, we all understand, but there is something to that where it's like we are leaving just a little bit of that totally spotlit time that we were just all locked in together, right? Breathing our own air, just multiplying ourself on self on self on self. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Big fan of you both.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was wondering, Emma mentioned a little bit about like some paganism that shows up in the book, and I'm curious, as you're working on it, both writing it as sort of almost yourself and then editing as yourself.
Yeah.
How did you stay receptive to like the weirdness or the different or maybe like the capital T universe, that part of it?
Yeah, actually some of the weirder stuff I added when I was well because I felt that it was congruent or harmonious. There were a couple chapters like the scrapers that I wrote afterwards where I was like, what I can do is take some of the weirdness and like synthesize it, right? So it's never, no one's looking at this book and they're like, oh, she really took the weirdness out of it. That's so unfortunate. She could have left it like be a little bit more bizarre. Like that's not happening. But what I did was like look at those sort of raw components or that raw material or her inability to get to that place of meaning. And I was like, I can pull that out just a little bit and I can have a couple chapters where that's kind of what I'm addressing. So that's what I did. Like, I'm not sure, again, you look at the book at the end and you're like, this is what I intended? Like, did I actually do this? But yeah, I wanted to leave her experience, and her experience was in the language. So it was never like you could take that out, like that bizarreness, right? So yeah, she was going to leave that in, but the editor's like, let's zhuzh it up. Let's get over here and try this and do this over here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ask more questions, you guys. Well, okay, I also have a question.
Okay.
So this book begins with a major account of illness and ends with another major account of illness, except it's not the narrator's, it's her husband's. And the narrator finds herself in this place of being almost like a nurse or a devoted to her husband's wound and trying to care for it and clean it. And so it's almost like a dramatic shift outside of the self and into the physical world, which kind of mirrors what happens in a lot of ways in your last novel.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And talk to me a little bit more about that structure. I mean, it obviously echoes an experience you had of your husband almost blowing up on a plane.
Yeah, you
but,
almost blew up on a plane.
But, you know, narratively, what does that do for us, the reader?
Yeah, so that's really interesting about No One Is Talking About This, because it's exactly what happens. You know, you're like writing about the portal and you're like making these sort of like micro observations about the portal. And then all of a sudden something happens and you like have to jump into your body. You have to put on a mask. You have to like go to the NICU and you have to actually do something, which is not always the case for in a writer's life. It's not always like, get in the car. You know, like it's really not like that for us. But there's something very specific you have to do. But also as a writer, part of it is to observe, right? So it's not just the care. You also are observing the body. You're observing what you're doing and the thing that is passing between you. So it happened exactly the same way again, that I'm just like writing along, being like, oh, stewing in my own juices, enjoying my madness. Oh, my husband's blowing up on an airplane. And now I need to decide like how to get him to the hospital and what we do about this. So there's nothing to be said except that it was like this coincidence that happened twice. And it really did like mimic the structure, and I had to go back into that zone, which I felt I had been prepared for by the experience of caring for my niece. And I was just like, let me do this. You know, like men don't actually like to be taken care of, right? Like that is not, they don't want to like lie down on a bed and have their wound be irrigated. That's kind of our thing, you know? So I'm like, yeah, it's a very gender bending chapter, I would say. But it's like, I was just like, I can do this. Let me do this. I am a useless frickin' person, but I can do this one thing. Just trust me. I can.
So I was glad to hear you talk about Anna Karenina, because I had an Anna Karenina group this year and we read it over months, slowly and deliberately, and it's a transforming experience. Yeah. And I wanted to find out if you felt changed by your reading and it will affect how you write.
Well, I'm not going to put more trains in. I refuse to put more trains into my books. But yeah, I think that anyone who reads Tolstoy is just going to be like, how does he do that? My line in Anna Karenina that I can't figure out, and I'll probably like start to cry or something when I say it, is the childbed scene where Kitty's giving birth and she said, "Take off my earrings, they are in the way." And that to me is like, I freak out. When I even think about that, I'm like, how did he know? That is a real feeling. Someone had that feeling. Like Tolstoy was a woman giving birth at that time. How did that happen? So yeah, I think it does change you. The sort of chapter that I wrote about it is a process chapter that leaves the process intact. It's like, this is what it was like to read this book. This reproduces my notes, basically. But yeah, I think he teaches you things even if you don't want to know those things. Maybe I will write about a train. Maybe I'm going to have like the dog in there and stuff. I'm going to get super traditional after this, and I can't wait. Very good question. I'm so glad that you enjoyed it as well.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely transforming. You're right.
My question is a follow-up to that, really. I'm also a writer, longhand forever, and I think a lot about like what I like to read and how it is really different than what I like to write a lot of the time, or how I can write. And nobody writes like you, complimentary.
Thank you.
So I'm curious to know like what really grabs you as a reader and how you think about it in terms of your own writing process. And if you would take a follow-up, my friend Jenny wants to know who your favorite mystic is.
My favorite mystic. Yeah. Okay, I'll think about that for a second. Wait, what was the first part?
Who do you read?
Oh, no. So there's this book by Richard Hugo called The Triggering Town, right? And it's a poetry sort of process book. And he's like, sometimes you're basically driving through a town and you get an idea, right? And so this is The Triggering Town. There are people for me who are like that. And it's not necessarily really narrative people, because if you're being swept along by a narrative, you're not stopping every couple lines to write something down. It is the people whose individual sentences are very crunchy and really get like, they're sort of like grappling hooks in you, if that's what that is. It is like someone that you can't go even 2 lines without. So like Cesar Ira's Ghosts is one for me. I have actually a whole shelf. Like Gert Hoffman is good for me. Anne Carson is very good for that sort of thing. It's the people that you just can't make it that far without writing something down. Favorite mystic. I think I do have a little Hildegard of Bingen thing. I think, right? Like, I think that we've all got that.
I'm Julian of Norwich.
You're Julian of Norwich. But you know, I also do have a thing for the little flower. Her self-regard was absolutely insane. She loved herself so much. It had to have been from God. If you read Story of a Soul, her autobiography, you are just like, this bitch loved herself because God did. And it was just like, it's absolutely beautiful. And she's a kid. She's like dying of tuberculosis. She's a child. Yeah. Read this and you're like, that's what it's about. She has this really great thing where she's like, I would always smile at this particular sister that I didn't like. And it was my pleasure to smile at her because I didn't like her. And one day, this nun is like, what do I do that like pleases you so much that you're constantly smiling? And she's like, she'll never know basically that my secret is that I really don't like her. And that's why it pleases me so much to smile at her all the time. It's just like really, really wonderful.
I was going to say initially that you find that in Marjorie Kemp, but now I'm thinking about Catherine Ann Porter again.
Yeah.
She really, she loved herself, ?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's really one of those things where you're just like, my dad's kind of like that. You would just he walks into a room and you're like, he loves himself because God loves him. It's just one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. We can keep going on about mystics.
I had another question.
Yeah, go for it.
Gosh.
Not at all.
So, a lot of the examination of the self is in this book, obviously. And this was your mad self. This was kind of, and you are past that point. So is there still that person within you somewhere? Do you still feel like you nurture them a lot? Do you still feel like they come out at certain points?
Yeah.
What is your interface with that self?
Yeah, basically if I take it to 6 quads, I can find her at any time. If I take it all the way up to 6 shots, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
gonna ask
6
if
quads. I know.
24.
Yeah. So I'm actually having like a little bit of a migraine right now, and it's very interesting because you don't trust yourself in that moment to like be yourself and to answer questions as you truly would. So there's a difference between wellness and being not well in the sense that I know that I can appear in front of a crowd right now. I can be having this happen, but I have not slipped into the other world, right? So that is reassuring. That is like this feeling of self. But yeah, no, I can do it at any time. You're wearing a striped top. If I was like looking at those stripes too long, this would start to travel for me. I would start to have one. I would start to go into this state. It gets a little bit tricky because you have a lot of ideas sometimes when you're like in that aura state and you're like, well, there's a sort of great chapter in Oliver Sacks's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat about a guy named Witty Ticky Ray. And when he was medicated and didn't have his tics anymore, he was like, but I'm not myself. So they had to sort of find a middle ground between like medicating his tics out of him, which he felt to be his person, and, allowing him to sort of exist in the world. So yeah, I found that chapter very poignant for that reason, because I'm like, I don't know, you do have that sense that person on the hilltop, that person seeing colors, that is the real you, right? But you can't, she's too intense. Like you can't stay with her forever, right?
Yeah. Some people do things in college and they connect to that thing then. So,
yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh.
You mentioned writers with sort of crunchy sentences that inspire you when you want to stop and write something. Are there writers whose style just made you sort of stop in your tracks and inspired you? For example, you mentioned Nabokov. I'm kind of curious how you feel about Nabokov, because Updike wrote about him a lot too.
Oh, yeah. No, Nabokov is great. And I actually have, again, a very practical sort of bit of advice for you, which is when you're looking at your own book and you're going through copy edits and you're like, my sentences are not that good. My adjectives are not that good. My words are not that good. Just go through Nabokov and steal whatever you freaking want. Speak Memory is the best for that. You just go through and you're like, well, I wouldn't have picked that one. And you just like take it and you tuck it in your cheek and then it's yours. Yeah. So he's absolutely great for that. I mean, there's writers that people like to write about, that's like pretty much the answer for that. You're like, those are the ones, right? The ones who are interesting to write about. They've got legs,
Just have a quickie. Can you comment on the cover of your book?
Yes, I can. Do we like the cat? Yes. Jason was very resentful of this cover. He received the copies in the mail, and I was like, don't you like them, honey? And he was like, they're fine. And I was like, are you mad that the cat is not me yet? And he was like, I am mad that the cat is not Miette. So, I mean, he is very angry that the cat on this cover is not Miette, but she really has the flavor,
Oh,
right?
I always thought she was kind of like a psychedelic Miette.
Yeah, it is basically a psychedelic Miette. So they asked me, this was like my one great design success. It's never going to happen again. I had the Priestdaddy cover, which to me was weird. It was like the freckled chest and the nameplate necklace. I'm like, that has...
I like the paperback.
Yeah, I was like, that's nothing. And I was like, what about some stained glass or something like that? And then there was no one who's talking about this as kind of like an abstract form. That's great. But for this one, they were like, what would you like? And I was like, well, what about those, they've recently discovered that some animals fluoresce. Like there are these spring hair pictures where it's like this lovely image of them, but they're under the light and there are these patches, sort of like this neon peach. And so they came back with this. And I was like, damn, I did it. Like for once, I really got something done. I really think like I was signing probably like hundreds of copies of this the other day, and I just was glad every time I took down a new one and looked at that cat. I do worry about people who will pick up this book for other reasons and perhaps be surprised by the content.
I did have an interaction in the Instagram DMs.
Yeah.
Somebody asked it, is this book about cats? And I said, sorry, Robin, no.
No, I was like signing some stock in London, and just like an old man with a black poodle comes up and he's like, I'd like to buy a copy for my wife. And I was like, maybe don't. I was like, he was like, her name's Emma. And I was like, Emma, I'm so sorry that I'm giving this to you.
Hello. I have two questions. One, what is Miette up to these days? And two, is there anything you're kind of like itching to write about right now? Like anything that's kind of kicking around in your head?
Interesting. Yeah. So Miette has recently become addicted to something called cat TV. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but I would say that our data bill is like way, way up because they have to be watching it all the time. Yeah. So she rumpuses downstairs when Jason wakes up and she like begs for the cat TV to be turned on. And the one they like is like a stump where all of these chipmunks eat nuts and they just like shove the big peanuts in their cheeks. But then there's a black squirrel called the Dark Knight that shows up and he chases them all off. So it's actually like this whole drama that's going on all the time. I'm like, this is my telenovela. I never care what those people were doing, but I really care about like what the Dark Knight is getting up to. She's also recently started receiving salmon from her father, and she's loving him more. And so he is so sad that she is not his cat, right? So he is like one of these cat guys that all cats go to him. He knows all the tricks. I know. And Miette's the one you don't get. Wow, that's like a serious one that got away situation. So when I go out of town, she's like, well, you'll do, Papa. But that's how she talks. That's her voice. Recently, he's been like giving her the little fresh salmon. And now when he comes up the stairs, she jumps around the corner and she greets him. So he's making serious inroads. Yeah, he's making very serious inroads. What was the other one? Oh, what am I itching to write? So I just finished like a book of poetry. It started when I was doing the Sylvia Plath piece. I was like, what am I hearing in my head again? And I just like started to write a ton of poetry. It was really, really fun. And I was like doing it with my friends. And like every time I would write a poem, I would like text them in the chat and I'd be like, I wrote a poem about this. And it was just like very wholesome. And then I've sort of come to the end of that and I don't know. I was talking with my LRB people and I'm like, what should I write about next? What should I write about next? Suggestions. If you have a suggestion, come up to me afterwards and let me know. Because I'm sort of like, I'm floating free at the moment because I'm on book tour. So now is the time to kind of plant the seed in my mind of what it should be.
Did they ask you about and buy the book that you refused to answer? I think your quote was, no!
So I think in some earlier interviews, maybe in 2021, I was working on like an urban fantasy of like kind of the 80s, like Emma Bull variety, like Gossamer Axe type thing. Really great books. We should all go back to that time. And so I spoke about this in a couple of interviews. And then, of course, I like got off on other things. And I think the question was just like, will you tell us more about the urban fantasy that you're working on? And I was just like, no! Because I wasn't really working on it at the time. So I was like, that's my answer to that. I think you should just be honest about that sort of thing with the New York Times. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions if anybody has a burning desire.
A burning desire. Or we can go to signing as well. Yeah, anytime.
They let you.
It's the ladies' choice.
If we're ready to wrap up, then I will just say that copies of Patricia Lockwood's Will There Ever Be Another You are available for purchase at the register. If you do fold up your chair, it helps to leave it against a bookshelf.
Yes, thank you.
And
Housekeeping.
We will have some signing.
Yeah, we'll do some signing. Yes, anything else that we should mention? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Politics and Prose.